surely it's not just me. Is anybody else here as alarmed and or sickened by the biblical metaphors that try to explain the relationship between God, the creator, and us humans as the created? The more that I look at them, the more disgusted I become. And you know me, I love to do series. And actually, I think I may have already done episode 1 in the series about a month ago when I talked about the metaphor of the potter and the clay. It's one of my least viewed videos, but it is one of my favorites. So please go and check it out after this one if you would be so kind. In that one, I just did a retelling of what that potter metaphor could or should have looked like. But today, what will be episode 2 of this metaphorical autopsy, I want to look at the idea of the shepherd and the sheep. This is one of Christianity's most cherished images, I am sure of it. It is meant to be soft and sweet, pastoral and reassuring. It shows up in children's books and worship music and stained glass, even in hospitals or funerals or altar calls. And for many people, this metaphor was not just theological, it truly shaped how they saw themselves. And so knowing how seriously and how deeply this imagery, this concept is embedded into Christians, I want to do a full deconstruction of it today. So here's our agenda, and then we're going to dive in. First, I want to set the stage. I want to talk about why people love this so much and why it's so persuasive. Then I'm just going to kind of give you a retelling of the metaphor, all the collected parts of scripture, what it is that Christians believe about themselves as the sheep. Then quickly, I want to talk about the reality of shepherding and what this metaphor actually means if we are indeed the sheep, which will lead us further into what the metaphor is actually saying. And it's not nearly as pretty or comforting as I think the average Christian interprets it. And we will end with what this does to people, how it actually affects people in real life. So, into our first part, why do people love this so much? Here's what I think it signals emotionally, and we get a lot of this part from the psalmist. It looks like safety in a chaotic world. It looks like getting to relieve ourselves of the responsibility of protecting ourselves. We get to outsource this to someone who is more capable. We get belonging. We are part of a group with a leader. So for the person that is lonely or isolated, this can look very attractive. And it's very persuasive. It does a lot of reframing, like reframing obedience as intimacy rather than submission. It turns dependence into a moral good rather than a vulnerability. And it reassures people that are lost that being lost is okay. In fact, it's kind of the point. That's why the shepherd exists. And so psychologically, there's a lot at work there. It's very appealing to people that were raised to distrust themselves. People that are taught that the world is evil and dangerous by default. Well, you have an inbuilt protector. People that are exhausted by moral ambiguity or even by simple decision making. They can let it all go. I'm not going to do this in this particular episode, but I think if you compared the concept of being a sheep in the flock of a shepherd with being the slave in the care of a master, you'd see a lot of similarities in a certain kind of slave mentality that can develop and is being pushed. And this isn't something I've seen critiqued a lot. And it's not because I think that I'm reaching here. I think there's so many other things to critique within Christianity. And this one just so often comes across as, well, why would you critique the idea of comfort and care? But again, that's not what I think that this is. And that emotional insulation is part of the metaphor's power. So I'm going to tell you this metaphor kind of like a short parable here. So if you're not familiar with it, or if you've only heard the random verse or the random psalm or the random song before, you get the full idea of Christians who have really been raised under this idea and have been exposed to it from so many angles, what it looks like for them. So here's my little parable take on this. There is a shepherd, and he knows his flock. He knows each by name. He is familiar with them all. Not only that, but when he calls out, the sheep recognize his voice. They do not deliberate. They do not vote. They do not consider. They respond. Always they follow. The sheep are never described as curious or skeptical. They're not even capable on their own. In fact, they're quite helpless, and they're prone to wandering and getting lost and getting hurt and getting attacked and getting stolen. And when all of those things happen, they are unable to defend themselves. They're even unable to see the danger coming until it is already upon them. But the shepherd is aware. The shepherd is their protector. The shepherd walks ahead. He is their leader, and the sheep behind him move as a group. The direction that the shepherd is leading them in is never explained to them. They don't need to know. They don't need to know where they're going or why they're doing it. And the rod and the staff are always present, there to comfort and there to correct. These two are inseparable from each other, as guidance and discipline are two sides of the same tool. And still, the sheep will often stray. That's never a learning moment. That's just risk. Distance equals danger in the shepherd-sheep relationship. Because again, what is outside of the fold? The wolves, the robbers. Motives that we never get to hear explained. Just bad, just dangerous. You'll see why that matters here in a second. So notice the outside is not neutral. It's always hostile. It is always bad. And so the sheep that does wander off has to be saved, has to be retrieved by the good shepherd, who lifts it up and carries it back. And this act is celebrated. The lesson is clear. Leaving the fold is the mistake. Not following the shepherd is the wrong choice. This arrangement is assumed to be good because it always has been, even though the sheep are never asked what they want and the flock's purpose is never discussed. This is essentially, biblically, the metaphor of the shepherd and the sheep. Now, before we move into the next part of breaking down what the metaphor really means, I want to just ingest here a really quick look at what the shepherding process actually was. Why was there a shepherd? Was this just a man who loved animals and went out to protect some of the most vulnerable kind of animal for the good of their own protection? What makes the shepherd different than the wolf or the robber? Yeah, the shepherd protected the sheep, but so that the sheep could be exploited. Yes, it was guided and kept alive so that it could be used for wool and for milk and for breeding, and ultimately the thing that makes this all not so favorable, for slaughter. Care was not the end goal. And that is almost always how it is utilized within Christianity. Look at our good shepherd who cares so much for us. But care is simply an investment from the shepherd to get a better return. A good shepherd was not the one who freed the sheep. It was the one who maximized the profit from the sheep. Yes, the sheep are valuable to the shepherd, but only as a means to an end, for the shepherd's own well-being, not because the sheep had any inherent value or autonomy. Their lives mattered, but only within a system that consumed them. Which, by the way, what did the wolf want to do? The same thing the shepherd did. What did the thieves want to do? The same thing the shepherd did. Like, think about it for a second. If the wolf gets the sheep, if the thief gets the sheep, it's the exact same outcome to the sheep. So when the shepherd is celebrating, he's not celebrating that he rescued the sheep. He's celebrating that he gets to be the one to benefit from the sheep instead of the wolf or the robber. It has nothing to do with the sheep. Moving into the next section, let's get a bit more analytical, and really this is the main deconstructing part. This power asymmetry is not the flaw. It is the design. The shepherd decides the direction, the pace, the boundaries, the destination. The sheep's role is not to understand or care or participate, just to obey, just to be compliant. Like I said before, then dependency is reframed as virtue. Helplessness becomes justification, because maturity doesn't lead to independence. It leads to being rescued, if not forsaken. The better the sheep, the less the questions. Stay in line, follow, obey. Anything else is told here as something incorrect, something bad, something harmful. I actually don't know if you could design a metaphor that was more about control and power. So again, that autonomy becomes truly a moral failure. You're doing it wrong. Don't lean on your own understanding. To wander is not to explore, it is to sin. It is rebellion. It is weakness. And maybe one of the sickest parts then is that obedience that is reframed as love. We see this at large, biblically speaking. Obey or else. To obey God is to love God. That's what Jesus says. But love is not some mutual recognition. Love is responsiveness. Love is how well you fall in line. Knowing the shepherd's voice replaces discernment. It is essentially saying only have one master, one way, the way or the highway. In this particular case, it'd be the highway to hell. And so submission gets reframed again as trust. But is it trust or a lack of options? Is it trust or is it fear? Is it trust or avoiding consequence? And the stabilizer for the entire system is, you guessed it, fear. Fear is what kept you from really following that doubt, from wandering too far from the group, from thinking that maybe there's another voice you should listen to than the shepherd. Here, wolves are vague enough to mean anything. The world at large, which the Bible constantly tells us is a wretched evil thing. Other ideas, other communities, doubt, your own instincts, take your pick. You don't even need an active, actual threat. Just the possibility, reinforced constantly by the shepherd, is enough to keep the flock together. And within this metaphor, there's a whole lot of dehumanization baked into it, not just by the fact that we're compared to animals, and very lowly, stupid animals at that, but even within the context of the sheep-shepherd relationship, sheep are not collaborators. They're not equals. They're not independent agents. They're a managed resource and nothing more. Now, you might be saying, well, come on, God doesn't need whatever the metaphorical connection would be of wool and milk and our slaughter. No, but what does the Bible say? Why did God create us? For his glory. That if we don't worship, even the rocks will cry out. And what is he protecting us from in terms of the wolf and the thief? Something else getting that glory, just like something else getting that meat. You see it all throughout the Old Testament, the warnings of worshiping the other tribes and God being a jealous God. You and your worship and your obedience is his resource. And when something else is stealing that resource, he becomes very upset. And it's not a loving thing to save you from that idol worship. It is a selfish thing. Think about what would be a liability in this whole setup. Intelligence, independence, the willingness to dissent, critical thought, on and on and on. Every single thing that we might consider valuable or virtuous or integral is an assault to God if it is not under the banner of utter obedience. If we are sheep, then our value is conditional. If we are sheep, then our safety is temporary, as long as we are serving the will of the Father, of the shepherd. If we are sheep, our role is defined as to how useful we are. And again, we see all of this scripturally. I'm not taking the time to show you verse by verse by verse that I am not stretching this. But what is our purpose here on earth? To serve the will of the Father, to enhance the kingdom of heaven. The warmth of this story, of this metaphor, when it is felt, is a fiction. It is hidden behind the brutality of the reality of the actual shepherding process. But I do want to talk about how this actually affects people. Psychologically, it's awful. It trains people to distrust themselves. Again, I think that it's very safe to say this is an actual identity that Christians wear. They are the little helpless sheep in need of the good shepherd. Why are they that? Because they're so incapable, because they're so evil if left to their own devices, because they're so incompetent and stupid compared to the mighty good shepherd. Internalizing that, just like you internalize anything else, like the potter and clay example or the concept of original sin, it does horrendous things to the psyche and to self-worth. And again, any good God that would have actually made a creation for any other purpose other than its own slaves or worshiper glory should not desire that is the internal positioning, the posture of the heart of the one that they made with love. It tells you need external direction to be safe. That your heart is wicked above all else, as the Bible says. I said it before, but it's so important again. The Bible says, do not lean on your own understanding. Everything is meant to keep you stupid, dependent, loyal, afraid. It leads to actual behavioral consequences like learned helplessness or moral outsourcing. Again, it is why it is so sad to have these actual moral conversations with Christians. For a group that claims to have objective morality, they can do nothing when presented with a clearly immoral act that was commanded or done by God other than to say, well, then it must be good. You can't think for yourself. You lost the ability to discern right from wrong. You're just a dumb sheep. Go follow your shepherd. You don't know anything. That's the message. It leads to difficulty forming boundaries without guilt. You lose a sense of adventure and autonomy and capability under these ideas. You learn all kinds of bad habits like disagreement equals rebellion, or to question means to be in danger, or to deny, or to hate. Adults are encouraged to remain childlike. Independence feels like betrayal. If you grow outside the system, it feels like disloyalty. And by the way, if you think I'm being extreme, even the kindest version of this metaphor does this. Even without abuse, even if we assume good intentions, the very structure itself normalizes total authority on one side, praised compliance on the other. And I get it. I see where believers get stuck. Like, okay, I heard what you just said, but why is that a bad thing? Because you've been doing this your whole life. You have been the sheep refusing to question the shepherd. If you zoom out, you could just see yourself as this dumb little sheep hearing truth and being afraid of that truth and say, no, but my shepherd said this. You must be a wolf. You must be a thief. You must be an outsider. My shepherd would never hurt me as he fattens you up for the slaughter. So if you can't remove yourself from all of your indoctrination that has you stuck in this mentality, then do it as a test in something more normal in your life. Would you teach a child this? I'm a father. I consider myself a good father. I understand that I know more than my children. There are times when I tell my children, hey, you don't understand this yet, but I need you to trust me until you're old enough to know for yourself. You can't do this or you will get hurt. That's like a healthy dynamic of shepherd and sheep, right? But I long for being able to have my children become independent. I work towards and help instill in them a sense of self-worth so that they can become independent agents in the world. It would be unhealthy of me for their entire life to want them and craft them to be fully dependent on me forever. My children are still young, 6 and 8, but I've already had conversations with them that sometimes dad can be wrong. It's okay to question dad. If you don't understand something, let's have a conversation about it. There's been times where I've had to apologize. Tons. There's been times where they pointed something out and I said, you're right. Let's go that way instead. So I'm not denying the authority in a parental structure role, which is the next metaphor we'll probably do. God is the good parent, but it shouldn't be all the way like this. There's nothing healthy about that. You can't even pretend for a second. If I, a flawed mortal father with limited years under my belt, fully understand the harm it would cause my children to act like God to them, then maybe God's not a good role model. Maybe the shepherd's not the best metaphor. Guidance, which is what one would think they're getting from a shepherd if they're a sheep, should not require total submission and being dehumanized. Care should not require feared obedience. Community should not require utter conformity and loyalty even to one's own end. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Chris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, yep, the Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn. My Humanist heroes, Chris, Craig, James, Jarrod, and Kristi. My Atheist advocates, Aquitar, Caleb, Dakota, Dan, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Jeremy, Jugs, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. Would you consider joining these fine people?